I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome back to the Trench Talk podcast. I'm Matt Reynolds, and this morning I spoke with British triathlete Amy Kilpin. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches of achievement and talk not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches, honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. Amy runs her own business and is an age group triathlete racing for Great Britain. But here's the thing that interests me most about Amy. She has some of the most popular brands in the world of triathlon supporting and sponsoring her journey, though, in her own words, she has never really won one of the big races. We talked a little bit about her training, how she set up her business so she can operate from the road and travel to races, plus, as I just mentioned, how she landed sponsors before she had even really got going in the sport. Not all sponsors, as you'll hear, are looking to support athletes who regularly climb the podium. To find out more about Amy, head to her website, amykilpin.co.uk. If you enjoy Trench Talk, please remember to hit the subscribe button inside your chosen podcast player. I get quite a few requests for guests and other ideas for the show. Another shout out to Craig for suggesting I track down Amy, his second guest recommendation. If you have any suggestions of your own or just want to say hi, you can email me, podcast@xrm.com.au. If you're feeling super generous and want to help support the show, review Trench Talk on iTunes or connect with me on Facebook, Instagram or on LinkedIn. Enjoy my chat with Amy Kilpin. Amy Kilpin, thanks for doing this.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm in my home office this morning. Where are you located?
I am currently at home. It's 7 p.m. and I've just eaten and trying to wind down after a busy day.
Very good. Now, you're currently training through your winter.
I am.
Which has its challenges. Which race are you currently preparing for?
So ordinarily I have quite an early season race in January or February, but we've decided against that this year because my main race of the year is actually in July. So I've got a few build races leading up to that, and one of which is the Manchester Marathon. So I think that's the next sort of key race on the calendar, which is in April.
So it's actually not a triathlon, it's just a straight marathon.
It is a straight marathon, and it's to gear me up ready for the full Ironman in July, which involves a full Ironman.
And because you've raced a lot of 70.3 races, is that your first full Ironman?
No, actually, I did an Ironman back in 2013 as my first Ironman, and I did a follow-up one in 2014. Since then, I've basically tried to get faster. So it's been a case of scaling back the distance so that we can focus a bit more on speed, which I've managed to actually do over the past few years. I've brought my time down quite considerably on a 70.3. So yeah, back to Ironman to see what I can do there.
Oh, very good. You can actually follow your journey on your website. I've had a look through a few of those times and I can see that they are coming down. So is this block at the moment of training that you're in just really putting the Ks, the miles into your legs so that hopefully that increased speed comes through in the longer race? Is that the kind of the broad idea behind it?
So what we're doing over winter is actually quite the opposite to the general kind of view on periodized training. People like to think that winter is all about putting the long miles in. My coach is kind of going for the exact opposite view. So what we're actually trying to do over winter is increase the threshold. And that way, once we've increased the threshold, i.e. you can go faster, go harder, we'll then add in the endurance later on in spring so that once you can race a little bit harder and faster, you'll be able to hold the intensity for longer. So that's the plan. So at the moment, we're keeping the swimming ticking over, working quite a lot on technique at the moment. And with the bike, we're also ticking it over, but trying to increase the threshold. So there's nothing dramatic going on with the bike. It's a couple of hard, short, sharp sessions and some longer stuff at the weekend to get the endurance miles in. And we're actually going through a period of run focus at the moment to gear up ready for the marathon.
So you'll obviously taper off the swimming and the bike going into that, I would assume?
We won't taper them off. So the marathon isn't my sport. Ironman and triathlon is my sport. So we'll continue biking and swimming, but we'll just scale them back slightly as the focus is effectively on a run. So if you look at the number of sessions I'm completing throughout the course of a week, there's more in the run program than there is anything else.
And what does a typical week of training look like for you?
Well, because I work as well, I run my own business. It's quite a case of juggling the two, trying to fit in, enough training so that I'm getting a significant performance benefit, while continuing to, obviously run my business and satisfy my clients. So it varies really. I'd say an average week is between 12 and 15 hours of training, so it's not ridiculous, but then there's kind of blocks where I'll go away for training camp and it'll be more like 20 to 25 hours.
I wanted to ask a bit about the way you've set up your work later on, but are you training once a day, are you training twice a day? Like, on a really break that down on a day-by-day basis, what does the week look like?
So there's approximately, I train twice a day. Nearly every day there's 2 sessions.
Okay.
There's a couple of days a week where I might just have 1 session, but ordinarily it's 2 sessions a day. I will generally try and complete one of the sessions as early in the morning as I can, so it's out of the way, and then I'll work for the majority of the day, and then do another session, usually late afternoon. I don't like training in the evenings. I don't know how people do that. I'm sure I used to do it when I worked full time, but I can't do it anymore. It just feels wrong. So, especially in winter here.
And a little bit hard to get to sleep when you're training so late, right?
Yeah, exactly. I just don't think it's good for your body. You should be winding down at that time of day. And I think, when you're working a lot as well and you're juggling the training, to be then spending your evening training is tough. People do it, but it's tough. So I have obviously the flexibility that I can train in the day. So therefore, I'm not going to train in the evenings because there's no need for me to.
Fair enough. And when it comes to training data, triathletes sort of have the reputation, some of them, of really being number crunchers when it comes to collecting the data that comes out of training. Is that a big aspect of what you're about, or do you train more on feel?
Yeah, absolutely. It does get a bad rep, I think. There's a couple of different schools of thought, to be honest. There's people that have risen to triathlon fame just racing by feel, the likes of Chrissy Wellington. But to be honest with you, the first few years in the sport, I trained mostly by feel and using a heart rate monitor. And when I started working with my current coach about 2 years ago, he's a scientist, so it's all about data. And I've seen big improvements in my performance since I've been working to data. But on the flip side, I think, there's being sensible with it. So if you have a bad session, you don't hit the numbers, it shouldn't put you in a bad mood for the rest of the day. Obviously, you've got to go by feel sometimes. If you wake up and feel rubbish, then is there any point in trying to, hit those high targets, or should you just, scale it back a bit? So there's a bit of both, but on the whole, I follow data because it's a really good metric to measure performance.
And do you work in person with your coach? Like, is he there through your training sessions?
Actually, no. In triathlon, it's slightly different to other sports, and a lot of it's done remotely. And I think that's largely due to the volume of training that you're completing. So, if he was here with me 15 hours a week, I'm not sure who would do the other's head in first. But it's a lot of it's done remotely. So we will have a Skype every couple of weeks. We probably chat on messages and stuff every other day. And I see him, check in with him every couple of months.
So you considered yourself a non-sporty person before you got into triathlon?
Yes.
What initially drew you in? Because there's far easier sports to start with than triathlon, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And certainly ones that require a lot less training too. So it's kind of opposite ends of the spectrum,
Yeah, it is. I have to say I didn't jump straight into triathlon. So when I say it was a non-sporty background, I hated sport at school. I didn't do any of it. Didn't do any of it through university either. I was always had a bit of an aversion to it. So yeah, I actually started working full time. My first job out of university, and I was working as a journalist in the shipping industry, which was quite random, but I enjoyed it. And I think it was maybe a few months into the job, I just realized that I couldn't spend the rest of my life just doing a 9 to 5 job, going home, watching TV, and then at the weekend, just sitting around or going shopping. I needed something else. I needed something outside of work. So I actually got into sort of hill walking and sort of walking up mountains, and I booked a weekend away on my own at the age of 22 or 23, and walked up a few mountains. And I decided that I wanted to learn how to climb mountains. Now, stay with me here because I know it's not triathlon related.
No, I'm with you. We're heading up the mountain.
We're up the mountain. So I wanted to climb mountains. So I started running a bit. I mean, I did a bit of gym stuff throughout the years, and that was about the extent of my sporting capability. But I started running because I thought this is going to complement, the hill walking. It'll get me fit. It'll get me in shape for climbing. And at the same time, I started to learn technical climbing skills at an indoor wall. So the running kind of picked up. The climbing picked up as well, but I won't go down that path. So the running picked up. I entered a 10K, then entered a half marathon, and then entered a marathon. My family thought I was mental because, it was so out of the blue. And this was over, the period of sort of 6 to 12 months. And I eventually ran the marathon. And then I ran 5 or 6 more marathons. And because, once you get that fit, it's really hard to then deny your body of the benefits. So
endurance sport is very addictive, right?
It's very addictive. I think once you've got your body in such a condition, it would be so hard to just let that go again. And also, the mental side of it as well, enjoying the training. As it happens, I got a bit bored of marathon running because it's quite monotonous, running 5 days a week, 6 days a week. So I was looking for the next challenge, and I entered a triathlon. There was just a problem because I couldn't actually swim front crawl. So my first triathlon was in the lovely Docklands in London. It's brown, and if you can imagine something that doesn't smell very nice, that's pretty much it.
Right. Yep.
And I swam this triathlon breaststroke with my head above the water, which was a bit humiliating. But there were actually a few others doing the same thing. I think it's quite a sort of beginners have a go triathlon, so it was acceptable. I didn't come last either. So after that, I just decided, I needed to really learn to swim properly if I was going to do another triathlon. So I went back to my local leisure centre and started taking adult swim classes. You've got sort of old people and some middle-aged women in the lane next to me and learning how to swim. It was interesting. So that was a fairly steep learning curve over the next year to not only learn to swim front crawl and get the breathing and everything right, but then to become, in a position where I wasn't actually coming last out the water. So the first season of triathlons that I did were only sprint and Olympic distance, and I came last out the water in almost every single one of them.
Oh, okay.
So it was, I was very slow. And then from there, I just decided to enter half Ironman and then progress up to full Ironman.
So you really loved it from the first race, although, you weren't coming out of the water in the position that you want to, you really liked it from early on.
I want to say yes. Do you know what? I think part of it is just my dogged determination. I don't really like giving up on things, and when I put my mind to something, I want to do it to the best ability that I possibly can. So I think I started it and thought, obviously, there was an element of enjoyment, but actually I think more of it was born out of frustration. So I was so frustrated that I couldn't swim front crawl very well, and I was coming last up the water, and I was hovering around second or third from last in every single race at the end. I managed to make up a few paces on the run. But yeah, I think more of it was just frustration and determination that I will actually get better at this and not be so embarrassed. I do recall there was one triathlon where I was last out the water, and I was the last person on the bike, and they were actually closing down the aid stations because there was no one else on the course apart from me. And it was so humiliating. And I got to the run and I managed to overtake about 2 people. So again, I didn't come last, but I was on the bike thinking, why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. Just give up. Just stop. Now, I'm no good at it. And when I look back and think about those times, it's quite amusing.
So you were saying that to yourself, but you didn't give up, right? So what was it that made you push forward? Do you have any sort of ideas on that, or is it just that determination?
Yeah, I think it's the determination, to prove it to myself. There was no one cared. I mean, I was a nobody in this sport at the time, and I didn't think I even had a Twitter profile. I wasn't announcing that I was doing races. There was nothing like that. So it was just me. It was just my head. I just wanted to prove to myself that I can do it, and I just didn't want to give up. I'm not a quitter by default. So I think it was just like a case of, pursuing it.
Well, that's an incredible, important quality to have, right, in the sport of triathlon and indeed any endurance sport, because it can be extremely emotional from time to time when you're racing and training.
Yeah.
So in the tough parts of races where you're falling behind, maybe it's not going quite according to plan, mentally, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and I mean, the types of races I do are long, right? So my races last about 5 hours for half Ironman and between 10 and 11 hours for full Ironman. So it's a long time to be out there. It means that your emotions go up and down, quite rightly, as you said, throughout the entire race. And it's really, it's quite tough to manage at times, because 1 minute you'll be feeling fine, you'll be flying along on the bike thinking, yes, I feel great, I'm going to smash this. And then 10 minutes later, you're just suddenly feeling like you're in a hole. So I think the way I get out of it is just trying to turn that negative talk into positive talk and saying, come on, you can do this, and I'm doing so well, and we're going to get a PB. There's kind of techniques you can use to try and turn that negative self-talk into something positive. So you're not endorsing the negative feelings. You're actually trying to reverse them. Just
overpower them in your own mind with the opposite kind of talk, as you
exactly.
said. Who's been the biggest influence on your career so far?
That's a tough one. I mean, obviously the biggest influence is my coach, I'd say, because he's the one that's kind of setting me the sessions that are making a difference at the end of the day. But I do follow a lot of professional triathletes and athletes, and I read books, even business books. I think there's a lot, there's a crossover, quite a big crossover with sport and business, and it's interesting to get those kind of applications of mindset and, not failure to perform and just trying to overcome those dark moments that inevitably happen. But yeah, I'd say Chrissy Wellington's book is amazing. It's so inspirational. And a couple of my friends, really, that are triathletes, and I just look up to them. I think what they're doing is amazing.
You have an incredible amount of great sponsors who support you. Now, for many athletes, that's a real issue, especially when you're doing these sports like triathlon, because they do take up a lot of time. And finding people to help you out is essential, but it can be, some people find it hard. How have you gone about putting that together? Because it's a very really impressive list, I must say.
Yeah, I've been fortunate, really. I approached sponsors fairly early on, so this is how that story pans out. I was with my first coach at the time, and I was looking to do my first Ironman, I think I'd just done my first Ironman, and I said to him, how do I get better? That's great, we've done it now. That was the big goal. How do I get faster now? And he said, well, you probably need a better bike. I mean, I did my first Ironman on a road bike with clip-on extension bars, so it wasn't even a tri bike.
Right.
And and I said, well, I can't afford a bike at the time. I was working full time, and I just didn't have the funds. And he said, well, can't you get sponsored? And I just laughed and said, who's going to sponsor me? I've just done my first Ironman, and I'm still new to the sport, and I didn't exactly, put in a world record breaking performance. And I went away and thought about it and thought, okay, well, I've got nothing to lose really. And a local bike shop had just opened up in the nearby town. So I wrote to them and they said, yeah, we're interested, come in for a meeting. And I couldn't believe it. I went in for this meeting and I said, look, guys, you do realise I'm never going to win a race. And they said, it doesn't matter. We just want you to sort of represent women's cycling and just, it was at the time, it was a few years ago, and women's cycling was quite few and far between. It's grown quite a lot in the past few years. But they just wanted somebody to represent the brand and be riding a bike who was a female and actually competitively-ish. So, and they gave me a bike to ride.
And that was the start of it?
That was the start of it. And I thought, okay, well, that seemed easy. Well, maybe I'll write to a few more people. So I wrote to a local physiotherapy outfit in a nearby town, and they also said yes. And I couldn't believe it. I just thought, this is crazy. What have I possibly... got to offer them apart from being mediocre, extremely mediocre at triathlon. But I think one of the things that I did very early on as a marketer myself, I when I wrote to sponsors, I would offer them something. So I think the important thing is when you're writing or pitching to a sponsor, potential sponsor, not necessarily saying, oh, I've been on the podium and I've won this race and I won that race. It doesn't work. I've never really won any sort of race of any significance, and yet I've got some of the best sponsors in the business, and that's because they're not interested in people that are just on the podium, that rely on, being on the podium as their source of fame, because actually nowadays there's a lot more to be said for social noise. And by that I mean, social media being a sort of an influencer and a brand ambassador. So if you've got something to offer them, offer it.
So that goes against what I would have thought is typically how it typically works, right? Because you think if you're winning, you get sponsors, and if you're not, you don't. But what you're saying is that's not actually correct at all. So when you're saying, you mentioned offer something, what did you offer initially? Because this is going back a few years now, so you wouldn't have had your website, you wouldn't have had your blog and all that sort of stuff that you do. So what was the initial things, apart from I'll probably never win a race, what were the other things that you went with initially that got that interest?
Yeah, big selling points. So well, I think I may have started my blog around that time, but it certainly didn't, I didn't have really many followers on social media or anything like that. So it's a good question. I said to them, I'll represent the brand wherever possible. I'll wear your kit when I race locally. I'll enter local races specifically so that I can give you visibility. I'll do talks at your shop or your clinic, and I'll put your logo on my web. I think I had a website at the time, just a rudimentary blog. So it wasn't much, but it was enough for them to be interested. And then obviously as things progressed, I do now have a social media following and various other things that I can offer them, custom kit with their logo on. And I think too many people just write and expect that, results are going to be the main draw. The problem is with people that are extremely high performers in the sport, normal people can't really relate to them. So if you get a professional athlete and they talk about a product, normal people don't really relate. So it's actually easier for people to relate to people like me, people that haven't really come from a sporting background, have come into the sport, achieved a few things, and if I am recommending products and I'm improving all the time, then they're probably going to listen.
And coming from that marketing background, I guess communicating all that you've got the skills to do that as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also I came from a journalism background, right? So when I first approached the local sponsors, I said I would write press releases and send them to the local newspaper. Local publications don't have anything to write about. So they published the news story that this local clinic and this local bike shop were going to support a local athlete. So that was great. I knew how to write a press release. I knew how to distribute it to a media list, and that probably helped as well.
Have your sponsors changed over the journey, or are some of those original ones still with you?
Some of them are. I'd say the majority are actually. I've had to change bike shops and chiropractic clinic a couple of times just for the bike reasons, just where they distribute the brand of bike that I now ride. But I would say the majority of brands I still work with, I'm a real fan of brand loyalty. I don't really like to see athletes chopping and changing brands all the time. It happens, yeah, but you can at least spend a few years with a brand before you. But yeah, some people change every single season, and I think it just makes them look fickle. There's also, on the flip side, certain brands that say, "Oh, we're recruiting ambassadors for the 2018 season," and again, something I don't like about that, because they're just changing their ambassadors every single year, which they think probably gives them more visibility and more reach. But I think it just makes them look a bit fickle, and I wouldn't want to work with a brand that only supports me for one season, because I don't see the point. For me, it's all about the long-term relationships.
Yeah, so you really focus on the long term. That's interesting. Now, you come from a journalism background. You worked for a shipping magazine early on, you mentioned.
Yes.
What did that involve? I read that on your website and I thought that's a long way from where you are now. So you got your start there. What was the job like?
It was interesting. Yeah, it was my first job out of university. I got offered the job straight away in the interview. So I must have said something that impressed them, or blagged something. So yeah, it was a bit of an unknown for me. I mean, I'd done quite a few journalism stints in work experience, but this was my first full-time paid job. And it was interesting, actually, because shipping is not a subject I was very au fait with. And I would say probably most people don't really have much knowledge in that area. But it was interesting because there's so much, it's so applicable to everything, and people don't realize it. So everything in the room you're sat in has probably been on a ship. And it was actually, I started working with a company at the beginning of the big financial boom in 2005.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So freight rates were the highest that they'd ever been. And it was crazy. We were writing all these news stories about freight rates being ridiculously high and people couldn't afford to pay them. And it kind of, the whole world trade is shipping. And if you think the way the global economy works, shipping is directly impacted. So it's interesting, if there's demand increasing in the Western world, then supply is increasing in China, and it's all going on ships. And it's also the piracy issues were becoming big at the time, and the environmental issues about the ice caps melting. So there was all sorts of stuff going on. It was quite interesting. I got to travel to some places. I went to Mumbai, I went to Helsinki in Finland, went to Norway a few times. Yeah, it was cool.
You got to travel, and that got your start. So you've got a reasonably big social media following now. How long have you been investing heavily in that space? Because that seems like a currency that a lot of different people from a lot of different fields really, really trade off now.
Yeah, it is. And I wouldn't say I've been investing heavily in it. It's something I've been active on, certainly. But there's certain tactics that people use to build their social media profiles, and I haven't done any of them. They follow people and then a few days later they unfollow them. I've never really been a fan of that. So I'd say I've been on it for 4 or 5 years. It kind of coincides with my start into triathlon, I guess. And it's super important. But there's people out there now, these kind of social media influencers with hundreds of thousands of followers. So it makes my paltry, few thousand look a bit weak in comparison. But it's still it's quite a niche area, triathlon. So I think if you can speak to a few thousand people about what you're doing in that space, then it's going to be worth something.
And I think it's great having numbers, but that doesn't always transpire into something positive, right? And you can actually leverage, because I've seen it a couple of times, you can leverage sometimes some very small audiences if you're in that real niche market, which sounds like really what you're doing. What are the trends in this space at the moment? Is there anything that you're starting to do, or is it just a case of documenting your journey?
Well, as a marketer, I deliver marketing presentations to my clients at the beginning of the year and, say what's coming up in 2018, what's going to be big this year. And one of the things that I'm coincidentally doing as well is live video. It's becoming quite prevalent. They reckon something like 80% of online visits are now video. So it's huge. I think the live video element has a lot of potential. The streaming of live events as well, it's becoming really popular from a sort of commercial point of view. And from a sort of personal brand development point of view, people are using things like Facebook Live and Instagram stories to get their message across. And it's very instant. Instagram stories, your stuff disappears after 24 hours. So you talk about it, then it goes. But it's instant sort of getting a message out there. I think live video is big.
Live video is big, and will continue to grow. There's a real the amount of people doing not only video but the live aspect is growing every day, right? Like, it's unbelievable if you think back even just a few years. Live video wasn't even available.
Exactly.
And now there's thousands of hours of content that you can watch if you so desire, I guess. So you've set your work up so you can move and train in different areas of the world.
Yes.
So you can, I'm guessing you can work from a laptop and a phone or whatever. Was that done purposely for your training, or was that something you had in place before you moved into triathlon?
It was neither, actually. So I worked after my stint in shipping, I actually moved into hospitality marketing. So I was a marketer for a local restaurant and hotel group. And I worked there for about 3 years. And then I got made redundant quite suddenly one day. Myself and another colleague, they were, scaling back their team. And I went round to my parents' house and sat in a chair and cried and said, what am I going to do? And it was just a couple of circumstantial events that led to me getting my first freelance contract. And then quite shortly afterwards, a second freelance contract. So it was never an intention for me to think, right, okay, well, I've been made redundant. I'm going to go and become a freelance marketer. It didn't even enter my consciousness. It was completely circumstantial and kind of just by chance, really. So I ended up getting these couple of contracts, and then I got another couple, and before I knew it, I was at capacity. And I thought for the first year, this was too good to be true. I woke up and, made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my laptop and spent, most of the day working. I could go for a run in the middle of the day whenever I want. It was, it was quite something. And since then, obviously, I realised that there's real potential in this as a long-term business opportunity. So I, have worked quite hard to get new clients, and I built a brand and built a website for my marketing. I call it an agency. It's really just me, and I have a few other freelancers that I outsource to as well. So yeah, it kind of happened a bit by accident, or by fortune. And it works really, really well. I had, in the first few years, I had a small enough client base and enough kind of very digital focused work that I actually moved to Lanzarote for about 3 months one winter. As, living in the UK in winter is not desirable, let's put it that way.
It's cold.
It's cold. It's not just the cold. It's miserable. It's grey and it's wet and it's just constantly damp. So that kind of penetrates you after a while, and training outside just becomes a complete chore. So Lanzarote is a good happy medium. It's not too far away. I can still get home fairly easily, and the weather's nearly always sunny. It's quite windy, but it's warm. So I moved out there for about 3 months, booked a one-way ticket, rented a room. I even had a flat here in the UK that I just carried on paying the rent for because I was coming back. It was just, it was almost just as cost effective for me to live in Lanzarote. So yeah, that was a good stint. Nowadays, I have some clients that I have fairly regular meetings with in London, so it would be a bit more difficult for me to do that. So I tend to just go away for sort of 10 days at a time, a week at a time, to somewhere warmer, pack the training in, and then come back to the miserable weather.
Do you have any challenges focusing when you're working sort of according to your own schedule?
I have never had a problem with it. No, I absolutely love it. I mean, it's preferable for me working to my own schedule. If I have to work to someone else's schedule, it kind of messes things up. I was always a bit of a self-starter. So I remember at university, sometimes I would actually skip lectures and I would go to the library and I'd make copious amounts of notes on a certain subject because I knew that I'd be gleaning more knowledge from the books than I would the lecture.
Oh, wow. There you go.
So, and then I'd go home and then I'd type them all up. So I'd, try and really reinforce that into my knowledge base. So, yeah, I've never really had a problem with that. I've always been fairly enterprising when it comes to managing my own workload and going out there and looking for work. So I actually sometimes find it hard to switch off. So I have the opposite problem. I mean, I'm traveling to races, to, fairly big, important races, traveling to places like Australia last year and Chattanooga. I went to the US a few times last year as well. And I end up working on flights, and the 11-hour flight or something goes so quickly because I'm just working the whole time. So sometimes it's nice. And when you've got something like a taper week leading into a race, sometimes it can all get a bit too much. You're going down, you're registering, there's a big hype, there's a buzz, there's athletes everywhere, all doing their final preps for their kit. And I just go back, open my laptop and get stuck into some work. And it's actually a really nice distraction sometimes because you kind of forget about the nervousness of the looming race.
Oh, so you use your work as part of the preparation then?
Definitely, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome, because I would assume that a lot of people would go the complete opposite and then have those, as you said, all the challenges of what if I go well, what if I don't, what if,
Exactly.
what if I crash, what if I, whatever happens. So that's a pretty interesting strategy, a strategy of distraction. Would you call it that?
Yeah, it just quietens the mental chatter that goes on in your head. I think if all I had to think about was just the race coming up, it would make me implode or something. It just gets too much sometimes, especially a big race. So I like it. I get back and I can chill and do a bit of work, a bit of distraction, and I enjoy my work, which helps.
Do you make an effort or time to relax at certain points though? And do you have a challenge with that?
I do find that challenging. I've become a bit better in the past year, and that's mostly because I bought a house this summer, or last summer rather, and it kind of got a bit on top of me because I had a massive race schedule. I had travelled a lot, and a lot of the flights were long haul, and I'm running a business as well, so I don't get much downtime. I'm working while I'm away, I'm working on flights, I'm working when I get back, and then getting all the meetings in. And then I bought a house, and on top of everything, it just made me realise I haven't had a holiday for 3 years. A holiday, people think I'm always on holiday. People that follow me on social media say, oh yeah, I saw your legs by the pool again, having a nice holiday. And actually the reality is I'm on my laptop and I never have a holiday from work or training.
Yeah.
So
and I'm at the pool because
training.
I just swam 4 kilometres or whatever you just did.
Exactly. So, it's a perception thing. And I don't post about the work that I'm constantly doing on social media because no one finds that interesting, really. So I kind of refrain from that a bit. So people don't really realise how hard I work. And, so I decided I needed a week with no bike, no laptop. I lasted 24 hours before checking my work emails.
Oh, jeez.
But I still didn't take my laptop with me, so it was progress.
Did you feel better after the week?
100%. I realised last year the importance of switching off. I thought to myself, because I run my own business, I can't be unavailable for my clients. I need to always be available for them. And the reality is, if I go away for a week, no one cares. You come back after a week and carry on as normal. It happens within the business. So why should it not happen when you're working with external consultants?
Yeah, because I know for myself, you can feel a little bit guilty, can't you? Like, you're right, like you're at home and you haven't called someone for a week. Well, if you go away and you haven't called someone for a week, they actually know no difference, right? Which is what you just said. But I guess sometimes for yourself, you can feel some sort of guilt for not being there, I guess, if they need it. It makes no logical sense, but you still get that feeling. I understand perfectly what you're talking about.
Yeah, you do. You feel guilty, and also I have a bit of a problem in that unless I feel like I'm achieving something, I really struggle. So on a weekend or something, if I'm not training and I'm not working, I feel like I've just wasted my time. So there's that as well. It's kind of overcoming that and realizing that actually, you know, it's okay to relax. It's okay to sometimes just do nothing or, you know, binge watch something on Netflix. You know, when you're working hard and you're training hard, it's really important to get that downtime in. And last year was a bit of an eye-opener for me in terms of realizing that.
So you're an achiever, which is pretty obvious from the outside looking in, right? Now, on a typical night, how many hours do you sleep, roughly?
I try to aim for 8 hours.
And do you nap during the day?
No.
Not
God,
all,
no.
okay.
I know some pro triathletes that are, you know, full-time and they have nice little naps in the afternoon. I certainly don't have time for that in my life.
Because you're working so much. So do you feel tired a lot, or you're okay? It's just that you've gotten used to it now?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. You know, you go through periods where you feel a bit more tired than normal. But I'd say on the whole, I'm fine. I sleep well generally. If I don't sleep well, I think the biggest realization I had when it comes to sleep is that if I don't sleep well, nothing changes. I used to freak out a bit when if I didn't have a very good night's sleep, I'd think, right, my sessions are all going to be bad today. I'm so tired. And last year, at the beginning of last year, I raced in Dubai and I flew out and I was, it's a weird different time difference. So it's about 5 hours. So it's kind of not significant enough to feel, you know, like you're swapped your body clock around, but it's not insignificant either. And the first 3 nights before the race, I slept so badly. I think I had about 3 hours sleep. So I was kind of feeling like this is a disaster. This race is going to be a complete disaster because I'm not sleeping.
It's over before it starts, yeah.
Yeah. And then the night before the race, lo and behold, I slept about 2 or 3 hours again. So I woke up on race day feeling like a zombie. And I thought, okay, look, just, you know, we're going to just have to do what I can here. It is what it is. And I had my best performance ever. And it still stands as my fastest time ever at 70.3. So, you know, I've realized that sleep doesn't matter. And actually overcoming that kind of psychological barrier, because that's what it is at the end of the day, a lot of the time, you know, waking up and thinking, oh, I only had about 4 or 5 hours sleep last night. Oh, well, just, you know, carry on as normal. It's fine. I know that I can perform at my best when I don't sleep well. So there's no reason why I can't perform at my best today, you know, because I didn't sleep well last night.
It's sort of a bit like the training data, isn't it? Because if you actually know how much you have slept, that can have the negative effect. So I get what you're saying there. And I suppose at the end of a race, you kind of feel like a zombie anyway, right? So if you start the race as one, I guess it's your best performance. So maybe that's a better way of approaching it.
That as you mean to go on. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, just a couple more questions, Amy, and then we'll wrap up. But if you could click your fingers and have it all done, where do you sit in 10 years?
Triathlon or other stuff?
Oh, business and triathlon, everything. Yeah. They're so intertwined for you, so let's cover them both.
Yeah, they are intertwined. So I would have definitely qualified for Kona, which is the Ironman World Championships. It's the most coveted race in the industry. Qualified and, if this is kind of, you know, clicking my fingers and having my dream wish list, then I'll have won my age group at Kona, but I'm probably a long way off that. And I'd probably like to scale my business as well. So get to a point where I've actually got employees and I've got an office and potentially opened a franchise somewhere abroad.
A couple of big things on your list.
Yeah, nothing too out of reach.
Do you have any, you mentioned one book earlier. Do you have any favourite books or documentaries that you recommend?
I love reading.
You're a reader.
I love books. Yeah, I'm at the moment, or the last about 3 years, I've just almost perpetually been reading either sports books or business books, unsurprisingly. But one of the books I read a year or two ago was Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I think it's a really interesting book, which kind of shows, it basically talks about the 10,000 hours rule and why do some people become exceptional in something in their field. So yeah, I love that. And I'm a big fan of the Tim Ferriss podcast, which I listen to regularly. And he interviews mostly either sports personalities or business people successful within businesses. So that's definitely appeals to my interests.
No, it's a good show, that's for sure.
Yeah.
One question I ask everybody: if you could have one law changed, Amy, what would it be?
I would, here in the UK, I'd probably make sure that every single road has to have a cycle path on it, a cycle lane.
Ah, nice, yep.
Yeah, or maybe not just in the UK, that's very geographically prejudiced. But I know other countries are geared up for it a lot better than we are. But yeah, certainly it's causing a lot of problems here in the UK, so I think I'd go for that.
Do you have a population that's riding more and more in the UK?
It's proliferating. Yeah, cycling in the past few years has just grown considerably, and unfortunately, I see on my Twitter timeline or Facebook every single day somebody's been knocked off their bike, and it's a real concern, and it's putting people off from riding outside, and it certainly puts me off at times. And they're trying to get more women into cycling, but when people are getting knocked off their bikes, it's no wonder why it deters people.
Yeah, you're going to think twice. Have you been knocked off before?
I haven't, touch wood.
You haven't? You're lucky.
It's kind of a numbers game. I feel like it's going to happen. It's just when. That's the sad truth.
Yeah, I haven't been injured really significantly, but I've been knocked off by cars 3 times. I've done a bit of cycling in my time, and you've really got to have your wits about you on the road sometimes. And I don't know what it is, but yeah, sometimes you don't perhaps get the room and maybe even the respect that you probably should get as a fellow citizen. But anyway, that's a big conversation, isn't it? So we'll leave that one aside.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to add or any parting words, Amy, before we wrap this up?
I don't think so, no. I'd love to come back to Australia at some point, if that's a relevant comment to make.
No, for sure. We'd love to have you. Where did you race last year when you were here?
Yeah, it was actually 2016.
2016,
I raced there.
Okay.
At the back end of 2016. I raced in Mooloolaba. So, yeah, was beautiful.
Very nice part of the world, yeah.
Sunshine Coast, yeah. And then after the race, because I always try and turn especially if I'm traveling long haul, I always try and turn what's just a race into an adventure. So, for example, I raced in Vietnam in 2016 as well. So I decided to fly to Thailand, and there's a training place called Tanipur, which is amazing. It's in the middle of Phuket, and it's beautiful, and all the amazing training facilities. Trained there for about 5 days, flew to Singapore. I'd never been to Singapore, so I did a night at Singapore in a nice hotel, and then flew to Vietnam to do the race. So I came back from that race thinking, yeah, I got a real adventure out of that. So when I flew to Australia, I flew to the Sunshine Coast, flew to Brisbane, went to the Sunshine Coast, did the race. And after that, I went back to Brisbane, hired a car, and I drove on my own from Brisbane to Sydney. And I stayed off, which for you Australians is probably like, oh yeah, it's a really short drive. You could do that in
not for me, it's not.
One day.
No, that's a decent drive.
Yeah, I spoke to a few people in Australia and I said, I'm driving all the way from Brisbane to Sydney, and they were like, oh yeah, it's not that far. But if you live in England, it's really far. It's like 600 miles or something. So I stayed off at a couple of places on the way. I stayed at Byron Bay and
very nice part of the world.
Port Macquarie as well. So that was really cool because I got a little adventure. I was on my own, which means you always meet more people when you're on your own. But and then a few nights in Sydney. So again, it was a real adventure, a bit of an experience.
And is that on your list of races or places to come back to anytime soon? Australia, that is?
Probably not in the next year, but maybe in 2019 I'll look at doing something out that way, because it is a very cool place. I was very drawn to it, and I'd love to come back and explore a bit more.
Awesome. All right, Amy. Well, I'm going to let you get back to what is your evening. I'm early morning, but your evening. Once again, thank you for carving out a little bit of time and for doing this. I probably should also mention that a listener, Craig, asked that I track you down. I think he follows you a bit on social media and has enjoyed your journey. And thank you for taking the time. It's been a blast.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ symbol followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.